Awesome. So really getting the whole organization behind it to continuously communicate that information out.
Yeah, you have to.
So probably not like a PDF document buried in your corporate SharePoint site?
Probably not. Yeah, I think that having it accessible online is really important. Early on, before the documentation was actually live on a URL, it was local, so you had to have it locally and like download the repo and run it. You had to run the code on your machine, and that was a huge barrier. So that was kind of frustrating. So once it was live and you could just go to this URL, you could bookmark it, it made it much more easier to get that information out there.
Awesome. How about at Facebook?
So we have a similar process. We have what we call the FIG, the Facebook Interface Guidelines. There's a team that works on that to keep it up to date. We use, in terms of communication, we use Facebook at Facebook. So we use Facebook to Facebook groups to communicate with each other. So you often find a group specifically for that FIG kind of process, and people ask questions there and submit different patterns as they uncover them. It's pretty kind of democratic. So as people kind of use a pattern and kind of innovate on top of it, that gets added to the FIG so that others can use it. In terms of VR, we are dealing with different constraints. So we've been working with the folks at Oculus to come up with kind of best practices for patterns to use based on the constraints of the hardware and ergonomics, and physiology. So, you know, it's really easy to be disoriented in VR, and it's really easy to fuck it up. So we have things like, you know, the UI must be a certain distance from your face. You must always see a ground plane. You shouldn't have like static kind of elements that follow you around, and these are all kind of like trial and error, because this is kind of like the first thing you do when you enter VR is you try these things, and then you throw up a little bit, and then so in terms of Facebook and Oculus, we invest a lot on these practices and communicating them across the company.
So is it just like one person throwing up, or do multiple people have to throw up before you decide on a standard?
Actually, nobody's thrown up yet.
Oh, okay.
But
not yet.
But maybe by the end of the week.
Yeah. So are there any like specific standards that you guys have come up with in testing or in the lab that you can share with us?
Sure, they're available online.
Okay.
I'm not sure what the URL is, but it's a Google search away. But they have, like I said, the distance from your perspective is very important. Density of information is very important. You know, you want to avoid very dense, like small fonts in that space. Because of the limitations of the hardware, having UI in your peripheral is problematic. So you kind of rely on moving your head so the UI is on the center of you. Those are a few kind of things to consider if you guys want to dive into that.
Awesome.
Yeah. The only thing I want to add is that a lot of companies don't really establish a ubiquitous language, which is really important because when you have new people coming into your company, you know, you've been there for a while, so you know all these acronyms, or you know, like the Scout. What was it? Solid Scout.
Scouts.
You know, so it's important to have a ubiquitous language and keep that as kind of like a dictionary that people can go to when they're just coming on board.
Awesome. What? Jeff?
We realized that was a huge problem and have now like a BuzzFeed glossary, I guess it's called, and it's like an Excel sheet of a list of terms, and it's crazy how much like internal jargon you can come up with, and even like being there for 2 years, you look at it and you're like, I don't know what some of these things are. But then the challenge there is keeping it updated, having that accessible, and lots of challenges that come with that. But it's definitely important to get those things down to at least be like able to send it to someone who's new and like, here, you can look at this.
Yeah, that's why you guys need IAs.
We do.
Well, I know we're running low on time, so this has been very awesome, very informative. I hope you guys think so as well, but I wanted to open it up. Do you guys have any questions for anybody on the panel? That's how good we are. Oh, yes, there we go.
Sorry, I was missing this conversation.
It's the experience. Yeah, I'll take that one. So what you're referring to in our world, we call affordances. So affordances, you know that I'm sure many of you have seen a handle on a door. This is a really common example. And there's no sign that tells you whether to push or pull, or maybe there even is, and you do the opposite thing, right? It's frustrating. But the language that it's, you know, the information that it's giving you is opposite of what you're mentally capable of doing. So until you figure it out, right? So those types of interactions and the experience in buildings and architecture is very, it is melding with information architecture. They're starting to, there's, you know, I'm sure everybody's familiar with the Vinnick project. Delos is building a wellness standard in Tampa for environmental, for lighting, for the entire experience. So I think that is relevant, and it will continue to grow. Did that answer your question? Okay.
Awesome. Any other questions? Cool. I'll go ahead. I've got a couple others here. So what role does language play in designing, like as far as organizational culture is concerned? And what kind of benefits do you feel that that brings?
I think the email example still applies. Communicating about any sort of thing, making sure someone is opening that email. We're just so inundated with Slack messages, with emails and Twitter, all of these different things, and it's like, how do you communicate to a group of 1,300 people what's going on? So being clear and direct is super important, like crafting that email in a concise way, like as little amount of words as possible is key to communicating to people who are just so busy all the time. And then choosing the right method of communication for the thing you're communicating. So if, whether it's Slack or email or in person and then maybe over a video call for the people who are not in the office, depends what, you might use a different channel depending on what you're trying to say. Or you might use many channels.
And so like you had shared with us the email from your CEO, right, talking about organizational change in general. Do you feel like that was the correct form of communication for that message?
I think so. So that email was long, but because Jonah doesn't email us every day, we open his emails. So that's another thing. If you're a person who emails someone all the time, they like, your emails aren't novel to them. But so after that email, I think at the end of it, talked about how we were going to have a global all-hands. So we had a global all-hands meeting a few days after that email was sent to have him explain it to us in person. So sending the email about the future vision of BuzzFeed wasn't enough. We needed follow-up on it. We wanted to talk about it further because it was such a big shift for us. And Jonah clearly had all of these thoughts about what we were going to be doing over the next year. And the email was just sort of the start of it, but then it continued to move conversation forward.
Yeah.
And to build up on that, and can I just your presentation as well, which was excellent, by the way.
Thank you.
I think one of the most frustrating things in an organization culturally is change, right? And how to kind of be okay with change is to understand it. So I think that being transparent as your company changes, it's super important in terms of language and how you communicate. Being very clear and open about the motives for changing, and having clear channels of communication as things change, I think is key for a company culture to thrive.
Yeah, and so Facebook, I feel like your company culture is kind of on display for the world. You know, people don't really know what the company culture is where I come from, but when when you're a Facebook or a Google. So if there's going to be a shift in organizational culture, how should the organization go about inspiring that change, right? Or at least, or getting the organization to embrace that change?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's a challenge at Facebook because everyone is so empowered that is sometimes hard to you have 10,000 people in the company and they all like super empowered. You can see them running to walls all the time. So it's hard to get everyone rallied up. Not hard, but it's challenging to get everyone rallied up towards a common goal. What helps is a very clear mission statement, and typically the people that join the company are very passionate about that mission statement. So if you can see how a certain direction can help us get closer towards that mission, in the case of Facebook is making the world more open and connected, you can see people getting excited about that, and you can see change starting to happen.
Yeah, one thing I want to add with respect to language is that not all cultures have the same translations for words. So some words that we use, like placemaking or wayfinding, there is no translation in Indonesian or other languages. So it's something that we want to be considerate because our world is shrinking. And we will be working with people globally at some level or another, or interacting with them. So I think it's also important to consider culture and ways that we can communicate, and possibly even symbols. Like I don't know if anybody's ever heard of Noun Project, but that's basically what they're doing is they're creating a visual language, and it's the people who contribute to that language are global. So it's just one thing I wanted to mention when we talk about global.
Yeah, well, one specific example of that. So at Facebook, we have this product called Live Video, which allows people to go to stream content live. And we were in a design critique talking about the entry point to go into this experience. So basically, what button do you press to go live? But so we had a button that said "Go Live," and that is it makes sense. Sorry, in English it makes sense to go live, but in other cultures, for example in Spanish, "Go Live" doesn't really mean anything. So that has a specific implication to how we design our product. In this case, "Go Live" is kind of a mode or an adjective of a video, like live video, as opposed to going live. Which doesn't make sense in other languages. So you can see how considering that influences your product decisions.
And even if you're a new English speaker, or if English is not your native language, I can see them confusing it with live.
Yeah.
Go
totally.
live. Okay. That'd be awesome. The Noun Project. The Noun Project. Yes, it's a great thing. I use it often. The icons there are, you could search by nouns, obviously, but they did add adjectives because I guess they realized that people were just searching for words like Google. Yeah, but they are coming out with a new platform that you can register for that is language centric globally.
Yeah, and I mean, as designers, that's going to be something that we definitely have to take into account more and more. As you said, our world is getting smaller, and we're creating more and more information every day than we have in all of human history. So we have to figure out what to do with all of this stuff.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
So I don't know if you'll have an answer to this, or be a genius if you do, but when you're talking about your email situation, right, where people are like, I just don't have time to email, and I'm sure somehow other people are going to hack my phone number, so I'm going to be getting text messages, the same thing. But have you guys found, with more and more companies pushing more and more content, trying to get fewer, well, maybe not fewer eyes, but trying to get the same number of eyes on more data, have you guys found any, like, which direction are you heading? Have you found anything that you feel like this is the direction that makes the most sense in order for our company to be able to get our product in front of more eyes, to be more interesting, and obviously visual is a huge part of that.
Well, content strategy is a huge part of that too. So I don't necessarily have an answer. My suggestion would be that that company hires a really good content strategist. And if they don't have information architecture, obviously that's really important too, because the message that you send and the information that you present needs to grab attention, right? So if you don't understand your target audience, how can you really speak to them to get to your product or service, whatever it is you're offering?
So yeah, just being really mindful of the content that you're putting out there, and then not pigeonholing yourself into one avenue, right? Like 2006 BuzzFeed, desktop only, you're cutting out a lot of your potential future audience. So while we might not know what direction that's going, is it going to be VR? Like, you know, do we plan for that now? But just being, as an organization, open to those cultural shifts and changes, so that we can get that information to the right people.
Did that answer your question?
As well as but I guess it's really important to stay flexible as things are going to change.
Right, yeah.
Exactly.
You definitely, I mean, deep dives are good on some things, but you have to be nimble in this day and age with your strategy and, you know, your corporate culture.
Whatever you do, don't make your logo bigger.
Face to space.
Yes, sir.
I was just wondering about maybe, if you guys want to talk about using IA to prevent people from getting lost. So you mentioned the map, you mentioned emails that people don't open. Think about VR, you know, if you take a wrong turn, they start going out of direction. Because GPSs that we have, it won't tell us to take a U-turn because they don't want to embarrass us. Just a turn. But you know, in all this content, you know, you start moving through this content, and you may maneuver a different direction. The on-ramp or the off-ramp that helps you get back on track or back to Central Key. Is there ways of structuring your content strategy to do that?
Content strategy, no. Information architecture, yes. The problem is that people do information architecture whether they realize it or not. And when they don't realize it, it's not done well. So I'll give you a perfect example with wayfinding. About 10 minutes before my event in February, which is World Information Architecture Day, I was on the phone with a gentleman who had flown here from Maryland to attend because the last 2 years he had been snowed out, right? So he was going to come down to sunny Florida, get some IA, and meet some new people. And I didn't realize how much of a cluster Tyler Street is downtown because they have the whole road torn up. And, you know, his map, his GPS is constantly telling him, turn down Tyler, turn down Tyler. So finally he's calling me. I'm stressed out because it's like 10 minutes before but I couldn't leave the guy hanging, right? He's traveled all this way. So, you know, if cities would consider that and understand that as an important piece of information exchange to people traveling within their cities, it would help. It would make that frustration a lot, it would be delightful, right? So I don't know if this answers your question, but thought put into systems within cities is super, super important, and I think we're missing the mark on that here. There's lots of ways that we can improve that, because I can guarantee you that there's some way to send that information to Google. How, I don't really know, because I'm not a back-end technical person, but just sharing that information would make it much more pleasant to travel within the city, I think, because there's a lot of construction.
Especially in Tampa.
Yeah, so does that hit on your point at least?
A little bit. Waze is one way to kind of set this up.
Oh, Waze. Yeah, Waze
Crowdsource.
loves to...
Which is Google now, so I mean, technically the information should be going to Google.
Showing back up in there.
Yeah.
And I'm also looking, I'm in medical, so a lot of times, you look at some of the main safety information from any of the various websites, something like that, they start going down the rabbit hole thinking they have a diagnosis without really
Right.
reaching back out and talking to the doctor, reaching back out and trying to find out.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a lot of times where we can grab some piece of information and run, and maybe running in the right direction.
That's easy to do.
So yeah, being mindful of the person creating that experience has to be mindful of the objective. So do you need a giant button at the bottom that says contact your doctor, or what is it? Or are you just flowing more articles about like disease, like so that they think that like what are you putting in front of the people, and like how are you considering the potential dead ends, or all of these potential places that they're ending up, depending on where they click or where they walk or whatever, giving them a place to go back. So a consistent navigation, navigation that tells you, that follows you, knows like, so breadcrumbs, for example. So like I clicked home, and then I clicked news, and then I clicked on this article under world news. So being able to go back, but just knowing why the person is there in this experience, and what do you actually want them to do here. And if you don't want them to do a certain thing, you have to think through that and make sure that there's really no way they can ever do that thing.
And another interesting point when we talk about context, right? So Waze, you mentioned Waze. I had that application for about a minute, and I was just so frustrated by it. I mean, it's good in a lot of ways. I like some of the features. I like when it tells me that there's a cop up there, right? Because, you know, I don't need tickets. But the interesting thing is that they limit your access based on whether you're in movement or in motion, right? And this was a point that was brought up by Andrew Hinton, who, if you don't know who he is, you definitely need to Google him because he's awesome, especially in the way of information architecture. He's one of my heroes. But he brought up a valid point, which is that, you know, it doesn't let you do specific things while you're driving, but yet it'll display an ad and say, hey, do you want to choose the C3PO voice for your Waze navigation? Like, what is the relevance there? Why would you even present that information to a user while they're driving? So.
Well, I think C3PO is probably a good place to put a period at the end of this conversation. Yeah, I mean, I feel like we are in flow, and we could probably do this for a while longer, but our time is up. So I just wanted to say thank you for each of you for taking the time and putting in the mental effort to be here today. So really appreciate it. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.